Award winning, or New York Times, CBS, PBS. I was telling David before, if I really went through all of his achievements, we'd spend the entire time talking about those. So let's just say he's, a wonderful science and technology writer, and we look forward to what he has to say. So I'll turn it over to you now, David.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope that the technology gods are going to be with us today. I find myself in Hartford because I have an important CBS Sunday Morning shoot to do immediately when we're done, so I couldn't broadcast live from the temple as scheduled. But anyway, hi, I'm David Pogue, CBS Sunday Morning. I wrote for the New York Times for 13 years, and I am going to talk to you today as a sneak peek about a book that I have just spent 2 years working on. It's coming out in January. If I now hop onto my presentation here, I will show you a picture of what that looks like. This is the book. It's called How to Prepare for Climate Change. It turns out there's been a lot of discussion about how to prevent climate change, fly less, eat less red meat, have fewer children, and so on. But there's a good argument for also accepting that the climate is changing and to be getting ready for it. So this book is already available to pre-order on Amazon, but the wise women were very fussy about limiting my presentation to within 11 hours long. So I'm going to give you a subset of the information from this book and my research. It is called How to Prepare for Climate Change, The Talk. So yeah, I'm just going to give you a few basic, the best of the book. So I'm sure you've heard this term, the greenhouse effect. The basic idea is that rays from the sun heat the surface of the earth. It bounces back as infrared heat, and ordinarily that bounces back out into space. But as we put more carbon dioxide and methane and other gases into the atmosphere, we're trapping some of that infrared heat that would bounce back out into space. And the result is everything heats up. So we're literally heating up the planet. They call it the greenhouse effect, which I think is a strange choice of name because not very many Americans know what a greenhouse is. You guys probably all do, but most people aren't aware, for example, that the temperature inside a greenhouse is 10 or 20 degrees warmer than it is right outside. I think we would do better by calling it the dog in the hot car effect. I think it would be better if people understood this to be the same principle. Sun comes into the car, but it doesn't bounce out again and it gets too hot for the dog. In this case, we're the dog. This has been a great year for observing the effects of climate change. What you're looking at here is a graph that plots the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the millennia. And this graph goes all the way back to 400,000 years ago. And what you can see is that there have always been spikes in carbon dioxide. Every 100,000 years or so, we've had these massive heat waves and massive freezes. What's different, if you look at the far right end of the graph, that's the last couple hundred years, this part is new. It's gone up never this high and never this fast. So that's what people are worried about. If you zoom in to the last 150 years or so, it turns out it coincides with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution when we started burning oil and coal to generate power. And if you superimpose the Earth's temperatures on that, you can see there's a pretty good relationship of the carbon dioxide and the temperature of the Earth. So this translates into 152 million tons of these greenhouse gases that we're pumping out every 24 hours. It's a lot. It causes, they call it global warming, but I have sort of a problem with that term because it really changes the balance of a lot of different systems in the Earth. It's heat waves and freak snowstorms. It's flooding and it's droughts. It's hurricanes and beetle infestations. It's all kinds of upset systems. I prefer the term global weirding because it's really just It's unpredictable. I mean, smaller goats and more expensive chocolate, and it's just weird effects that we're only now beginning to measure. This has been, as I said, a fantastic year for observing the effects. Historic wildfires out west, 5 million acres burned so far since September. That's the entire area of Connecticut, plus Delaware, plus Rhode Island. Imagine those 3 states completely wiped off the map. That's how many acres have burned. This was San Francisco in September. It looked, and this is broad daylight. This is noon. The air quality was the worst in the world. It was 4 times worse than Beijing's. We are not alone. Australia, you may remember at the beginning of this year, had those devastating wildfires. Put the smoke cloud so big that it reached the United States. This is Russia. This is in fact Siberia. They had heat waves and they had wildfires in Siberia, 100 degrees in Siberia. I mean, something is going on. This is a graph of how many wildfire acres get burned since 1980. As you can see, there's something serious going on. The number of wildfires has gone way up. But the biggest problem is this: 93% of all our new heat is trapped in the ocean water. It's not in the air, it's in the water. And that's why it's going to be impossible during your lifetime or mine or my children's to turn around the climate change problem. Even if we stop burning fossil fuels today, which we won't, it would still take many decades for the Earth to rebalance and for the temperatures to start coming down. And that is why I think we need to stop, well, not stop, we need to, in addition to mitigating the amount of coal and oil we're burning, we also need to start preparing. So I am aware that here, this graph shows the basic idea of why the weather is getting so nuts. This is the fundamental water cycle that you may remember from elementary school. As the Earth heats up, more water evaporates from the ocean. That makes more rain. That makes more hurricanes, more storms, more water back to the sea. Sea level rises, and off we go. I've got graphs enough to make your eyes glaze over, but these are the rainstorms we've been having since 1950s. You can see giant leaps forward in the number of traumatic rainstorms. This was Washington, D.C. Last year, they had 6.5 inches of rain in 2 hours. This was Midland, Michigan in May. The dams broke because there was so much rain, flooded many cities. This was Nebraska. This was last year. They had so much rain that they flooded out 2/3 of Nebraska's counties. And Nebraska is the breadbasket. This is where we grow our food. Same thing. This is 20 million acres in Nebraska, $20 billion of crops that were just lost to these floods. This is my favorite story. If there's any humor to be found in climate change, this is it. This is the Noah's Ark replica in Kentucky. They had historic rainfall and mudslides. They had to sue their insurance company for $1 million to cover Noah's Ark. This was Hurricane Katrina. The hurricanes are getting much bigger and much more powerful. Hurricane Sandy, some of you may remember, a few years ago, the biggest hurricane ever recorded in human history, 1,000 miles across. This was New York. That time, I know we in Westport, we lost power for 6 days, my kids and I, and it was cold. We had no heat. It was bad. In New York City, the risk of Hurricane Sandy level hurricanes used to be in 1880, you had 1 in 500 years, you get a hurricane that size. Then in 2017, it had changed to once in 25 years. In 10 years, it's going to be a storm like that once every 5 years. So things are really changing. If you look at all these floods and heat waves and fires and storms all together, this is a graph put together by the insurance companies. These are the number of catastrophes we've had since 1980. It's really getting severe. Now, I'm aware that climate change and its causes can be controversial. The Yale Climate Center did a poll in May, and they asked Americans, is climate change caused by our actions of burning fossil fuels? 57% of Americans said yes, 32% said no, 11% said I don't know. But the beautiful thing about this talk and this book is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you think we're causing it or if it's just some freak natural wave. It doesn't matter. You still need to prepare because these things are happening so often. So that brings us to the best of the book. The book is based on these chapters. It's about where to live if you have a choice, how to build or renovate your house, what to grow in your garden, where to invest in the new era of climate change, how to insure, how to protect your kids. And then there are chapters for being ready for specific disasters, floods, heat waves, drought, tornadoes, wildfires, and so on. And then the final chapter is where to find hope. And there is some. So hang in there. So I thought maybe I'd give you a few juicy morsels from these chapters. The first one is where to live. And you might be hearing increasingly the term climate change migration. And that's a reference to people having to move because they can no longer live where they have been because you can't grow stuff or it's too hot to go outside. And in our case, in the United States, the basic formula is this. You want to be inland far enough to escape the rising sea levels and the floods. You want to be north enough to avoid the heat waves and the ticks and the mosquitoes. You want to be close to fresh water because fresh water is going to be an increasing problem. You want to be east far enough to avoid the wildfires. And you want to be west far enough to avoid the extreme rainfall. So the sea level is the first thing to consider. There's this cool website called Surging Seas. And here you can pick any city on the coast. And by the way, 40% of Americans live in coastal communities. So we're talking about a huge chunk of people. And you can drag this slider and see what the water levels will be like in 40, 50 years. This is Westport. As you can see, the blue stuff is covering up a lot of what we now think is prime real estate today. This is Boston, and you can see again that a lot of the coastal areas, the downtown city areas are now flooded. The real problem, oh yeah, here you can see it happening in real time. There we go. That's the year 2100 for you. Boston's in bad shape. The real problem is Miami. Watch Miami as the sea level rises to 9 feet between now and 2100. I mean, that city is going away. And in fact, if you zoom out, you'll see that all of South Florida is going to be underwater. And there's no seawall that can protect southern Florida because the ground is porous. Water comes up from underneath the ground. This is Miami Beach. Miami is now flooding in broad daylight, not in a storm, not in a hurricane, just everyday high tides. And that's again because the water comes up from underneath. The Army Corps of Engineers wants to build a $4.6 billion seawall, but it won't do you any good. I don't know if any of you are planning to invest in Florida real estate, but I would think carefully about it because already real estate values are dropping as people become more aware of the flooding problems. And as people become more aware of the flooding problems, the real estate values will drop even more. So where do we live? You have to consider all of these things. And if you superimpose them, oh, and I mentioned the water shortage problem. This is the reservoir created by the Hoover Dam. This is where people in Arizona, California, and Nevada get their fresh water. It's only a third full left. It's emptying out, it's evaporating, and we're draining it faster than it can be refilled. So we really need to think, as we think about where to settle, about where there will be copious fresh water to drink. And it turns out that you can satisfy all of these factors I just mentioned if you look at the 42nd parallel. That's this dotted line here. There's a lot of cities north of it where you will be cool, you will have fresh water, you'll be far from the wildfires and far from sea level rise. As it turns out, there's really two clusters. There's the Pacific Northwest. They have plenty of rain, plenty of fresh water. They're cool. They do have wildfires, and they do have these massive beetle infestations. The beetles are no longer killed off during the winter. Winters used to get cold and keep their numbers down. Not anymore. Now the winters are milder. The beetles survive and multiply. They're chopping down 100,000 trees a day in the Pacific Northwest. So the other option is the Great Lakes region. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all pack up and move. I am saying that some people have the option of where to live. I mean, maybe when you graduate college or get out of the Army or when you choose to retire, you might be able to choose a new location or maybe a second home location. These cities have room to grow. They're all on the Great Lakes, so they have plenty of fresh water. A lot of them are quite beautiful, and the cost of living is spectacularly low. In the book, I tried to feature not just weather considerations, but also other quality of life factors. I grew up in Cleveland, and they have, a world-class art museum, symphony and zoo, hospitals. You have to think of hospitals because climate change means more people getting sick more often. So Cleveland has the Cleveland Clinic chain. They have professional league sports, an airport 15 minutes away, 18 city parks. And the cost of living is crazy. $1 here will buy you $2.71 in Cleveland. I mean, the downside is you have to live in Cleveland, but that's just a joke. So the number one town that kept coming up again and again is Madison, Wisconsin. It keeps getting rated as number one by these different articles. It's the number one fittest city in the country, nicest city, most caring, bike friendliest, best city to raise a family, best quality of life. They have this beautiful network of 5 lakes just surrounded by parks and trails. And they have a zoning rule that no building can ever be built taller than the Capitol building, which you're looking at here. So it will never be a concrete jungle. Highly educated population, great quality of life. Burlington, Vermont comes up a lot. Burlington feels like a seaside town, but it's on a lake. It's on Lake Champlain, this 500-mile lake. So you don't have the sea level rise or the hurricanes. Buffalo, New York, great chicken wings, great medical facilities. Again, it's on a lake. You got Niagara Falls, like an afternoon drive away. So all of these cities have lots of capacity for the incoming climate migration. So those are some city ideas. If you ever have a choice, if I were you, I would not be buying property in Arizona or Florida. Here's a chapter that I had fun writing. It's where to invest to take advantage of the new world of climate change. You might think it's a little crass to talk about making money from people's suffering. But the thing is, if you do have money to invest, when you invest in climate change prosperous industries, you are investing in solving the problem, right? Because you're investing in clean energy, electric cars, you're investing in things that will make the problem better. So your first thought might be, well, how about solar energy and wind energy? Because those are taking over. Traditional stocks really are terrible investments. I mean, the oil and the gas companies. The blue line at the top is the regular stock market. The red line at the bottom, that's if you had invested in oil and coal and gas back in 2010. You'd be down. If you'd invested in clean energy companies in 2017, you'd be up 60%. If you'd put the same dollars into oil companies, you'd be down 12%. So clearly the world is starting to get hip to the notion that conventional energy stocks are a terrible investment. So you might think, well, then let's invest in solar power. I mean, that's clearly where the world is going. And yet, look at the numbers. The amount of solar capacity in the United States is going through the roof. And as a result, 70% of new power built in the US is coming from solar and wind. I mean, that's great news for climate change. In fact, this is the most ironic, hilarious example of all. This is the Kentucky Coal Mining Museum. Last year, they installed solar panels on their roof. The Kentucky Coal Mining Museum. Anyway, here's another positive sign. Last year, for the first time in history, renewable power like solar and wind surpassed coal use in this country for the first time. That's a really positive sign. But as an investment, so here's the cost of solar power since 1976. It's gotten so cheap, it's cheaper than coal or oil in many parts of the country. And there's the rub. As an investment, you don't want to be investing in something whose value is getting cheaper and cheaper. The Chinese are just dumping solar panels on the market. It's a race to the bottom. So not a good investment. Same thing with wind. We're using a lot more wind energy in this country. Free, renewable, clean energy forever. And that's because the cost of it has gone way, way, way down over the years. But again, that makes it not such a good investment. So how can you make money from the move to clean energy? Invest in the utility companies that use them. It turns out that 38 states in the US have renewable energy mandates. They are required to supply a certain percentage of their energy to their customers from clean energy, like for example, in New York, California, and Hawaii, 50% by 10 years from now. And so the utility companies are going to have to buy or create the solar and wind energy to sell to these states. So companies like NextEra and Xcel Energy are making massive investments in solar and wind. Those would be good investments. Always a good idea to bet on water, stocks. You know, as the earth heats up, it's heating up from the south, right? So the heat is growing from the equator north. And that means that our breadbasket states, where we grow all our crops, are increasingly becoming too hot and dry / flooded to grow crops. So the growing parts of the country are going to be shifting north in the coming decades. And that means a couple of things. It means that we're going to need new crops that can resist these droughts. And that's companies like Syngenta and Monsanto. And as the farm belt shifts north, new people are going to be farming in new places. And that means they're going to need farm equipment. So that's an argument for John Deere and Navistar and companies like that. Electric cars are coming on very strong. Literally every car company on the planet is moving to electric cars. General Motors announced just 2 days ago, I think by 2030, 40% of their cars will be electric. These are the numbers of new car models coming out in the next 4 years. I mean, the world is going electric. And mainly it's supply and demand. So these are the countries that are planning to phase out gasoline cars in the next 10 or 20 years. Some of them have already done so. And California, by the way, will have phased out gasoline cars within 15 years. So obviously the car companies are moving to electric to supply those cars. So how can you take advantage? Well, you could invest in the individual car companies, of course, or you could get smart and look upstream and think to yourself, what parts will all those car companies need? Well, they'll all need batteries. They'll all need components like the wires and the connectors. And the batteries in these cars are rechargeable lithium batteries. So you can also invest in the lithium mines, the companies that get lithium out of the earth, because their business is only going up in the coming years. Finally, there's a chapter called Ready for Anything that's just a generic chapter on preparing for the effects of climate change. hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, drought, ticks, mosquitoes, on and on and on. And ye who live in Connecticut, you've already seen some of this stuff. You've had your power go out. You've had the country shut down for weeks at a time. So here are some of the simple steps that I encourage every single family to take now while the weather is not severe. First of all the experts recommend that all of us make a go bag. It's something fun. Do it with your kids, your grandkids. You get a backpack and you stuff it with everything you would need for a couple of days out of the house. So first aid kit, water, flashlight, tape, some basic trail mix or beef jerky, something to eat. And this way you can just grab this stuff when you're required to leave home. You don't have to waste precious time running around getting stuff together. It's already together. And then what you do is you have a little note on the bag that reminds you of the stuff you need to grab on your way out, like your medicines, your ID, and some cash. Super important stuff you'll need once you're out of the house. Really great idea. I did this with my son as a Boy Scout project, and it was really fun, and it makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you're ready now. I recommend that if you have an iPhone or an Android phone, that you install this free app. It's just called Emergency. It's from the American Red Cross. And what's really cool is you input the addresses of places you care about, like your house, your kids' houses, your grandchildren's houses, and then you forget about the app. You just forget you have it. And if there's ever an emergency coming to any of those addresses, a flood, a wildfire, an earthquake, anything, this thing will flash and beep and get your attention on your phone so that you'll get early warning and you can help them evacuate or get ready for whatever is coming. It's a great little app. Also has all this great information about what to do when there's a disaster. One thing common to all disasters is drinkable water. A number of cities in the United States, 700 of them, have a combined sewer system and rain overflow system. It's the same sewer system. And when the floods happen, they combine and you start getting sewage coming out of your tap. It's not good, not a good situation. So when that happens, it's important to remember what fresh water you already have available in the house. For example, you've got 40 or 80 gallons of clean, fluoridated, drinkable water right in your hot water heater. So what you do is you shut off the incoming water at the top, and then you've got water that comes out the bottom that you can let cool off and then drink it. Your toilet has a few gallons of drinkable water. I'm not talking about the bowl, unless you're a golden retriever. I'm talking about the tank. That's water that is fresh and is just poured in. You can buy these inexpensive storage tanks at Home Depot. As long as you put the water in a sanitary way, wash your hands, that water will keep in there for 5 years, according to the FDA. So you'll always have water in the basement ready to go. And there's also water in your pipes in the upper floors of the house that's stuck in there. So when the radio says don't drink the drinking water, what you do is you open the faucets at the top of the house to let the air in so that the water at the bottom of the house will pour out into your glasses and buckets. Another thing that happens in a lot of these disasters, by the way, sorry, here's some sources of gray water. This is water you don't want to drink, but you can use it for bathing or washing dishes or flushing toilets or watering your garden. So the bathtub, rain barrels, your pool or your hot tub, that's good sources you might have on hand already. Power outages are another common effect of extreme weather conditions. We're getting more and more power failures. I don't know if any of you live in Connecticut, but you know what I'm talking about. You can buy these generators. The one on the left here is a gas-powered one. They're very noisy and smelly, but they're relatively cheap, $450. That's good enough to keep your refrigerator going, keep your phones charged, keep the lights on. For twice as much, you can get what's called an inverter generator. These are smaller, quieter electronic ones, do the same job. Or if you've got the money for it, you can have somebody install a standby generator. These are the ones that power the whole house, and they come on automatically when the power goes out. We just put one in after Hurricane Sandy. We put one in at our house. We didn't spend the whole $10,000 to power the entire house. We just got a small one that just powers the kitchen, the bedroom, and the living room. So we have heat, we have light, we have a living space until the power comes back on. But for many people, $5,000 is still a lot of money. I should point out that there are all kinds of generators. I found this one on Amazon for $15. It's hand cranked. You power it up that way, and it's got a flashlight. It's enough power to charge your phone, and it has a built-in emergency radio, all built in. Another thing to think about when disasters happen is the cell power goes down, the cellular networks. These towers have gone down in every hurricane, every wildfire, and when that happens, you can't communicate with people. You can't get your family together. Verizon has what you see on the lower left here, that picture. Those are mobile towers. They're diesel powered. And what they can do is they can wheel these into the locations of cell towers that are down. The only problem is if the area is flooded or burning in a wildfire, you can't roll those things anywhere. So they just don't have cell service. So the other thing I recommend is that you sit down with your family and have a plan, have an emergency plan. Make it now when there's no disaster going on. What does that entail? Well, you want to designate in advance 4 places where you guys can agree to meet up as a family when you can't communicate with each other. So you want one spot inside the house, and that's for hurricanes and storms like we've had in Connecticut. So this is a place without windows. A basement, if you have it, a closet, or one corner of a room where there aren't windows that can break and shatter. Next, you want a spot in the neighborhood, like that old creepy tree across the street. And that's for situations where the house is on fire or it's flooding, where you want to be out of the house, but you still want to be nearby. Third, you want a spot in town where you can all meet up if there's some disaster, the kids are in school or you're at work, someplace where you can all gather that you've agreed to in advance. And finally, you want an out-of-town spot where you can all meet up, and that's if you're ordered to evacuate the town. So how will you find each other if you don't have a cell phone? That's how. The experts also recommend that you coordinate with one out-of-town relative. You agree about this up front, and that's the person who will be your command center, your communications hub. So when you're out and about and scattered by the disaster, you'll all be able to reach that one person to coordinate. So make this plan, put it up on the refrigerator, keep a copy in the car dashboard, keep a copy at the office. That way you just feel so much better knowing that you know what you're going to be doing. This is one particular natural disaster that's kind of special for us. Unfortunately, the winters, as they're getting milder, they no longer kill off the ticks every winter, and the ticks populations are exploding. And with them, cases of Lyme disease. The latest numbers we have are from 2014, but you can see the difference in the Northeast between 1996 and 2014. The CDC says that 30,000 cases of Lyme disease are reported every year, and that's probably 1/10 of the real number. The rest don't get reported. So this is a real problem. You do not want Lyme disease. It can be a lifelong affliction of weakness and muscle aches and confusion. So here are some things that I learned about ticks in researching the book that might reassure you. Most ticks don't carry any diseases. If you discover that you have Lyme disease early, you can cure it for good with antibiotics. Ticks can't fly or jump. I had a friend of mine say, "Oh yeah, I don't go for walks anymore. I'm afraid they're going to jump down on me from the trees." That's not how it works. They literally stand on the ground or on low bushes on their hind legs with their upper arms waving. They're blind. They have no eyes. Their hands wave until there's a passing animal or person, and then they grab on. That's why they say to wear long pants when you go for hikes in Connecticut. You can avoid any kind of tick bite or problem by spraying yourself with a DEET repellent. It's 100% safe. It works great. By the way, this is also kind of cool. Ticks thrive on humidity. Under 82% humidity, ticks dry out and die. And you can use this to your advantage. Like, let's say you live near a forest, but you don't want ticks in your yard or on your patio. 9 feet of lawn is all it takes. That's like a death valley to ticks. 9 feet of grass is too warm and dry for ticks to cross. So you've got a moat around your house. When you come back from a walk, they say put your clothes in the dryer. The heat from the dryer will dry out the humidity and kill any ticks on them. And while they're in the dryer, look over yourself. Make sure there's no tick on you, because you cannot get a tick infection until 24 hours after the bite. It has to be on you for 24 hours. And ignore what you read on the internet about removing the tick. Remove, Vaseline and candle wax. None of that works. All of that just makes the tick burrow in more. Instead, get a pair of tweezers and lift the tick out of your skin from the head. That's the safe way to do it. So the last chapter of the book and the last part of this talk is called Where to Find Hope. I know I've slammed you with a lot of pictures and graphs of disasters and frightening things about the current trends. And as we know, in the last 4 years, we've had a presidential administration who didn't do anything about climate change. In fact, directed the federal government divisions to delete the word climate change from the government websites. The president-elect is very different, has a massive plan in place to help to mitigate the climate change problem while at the same time providing more jobs. They have to go hand in hand, or nothing will happen. So the main thing I have to tell you about finding hope is that, in large part, much of the country completely ignored the president for the last 4 years and charged right ahead making progress without him. So believe it or not, this country's greenhouse gas emissions levels are dropping, and dropping fast. This graph shows how many millions of tons of carbon dioxide we've been putting into the air since 2000. That's not because we're switching so valiantly to clean energy so much as it is we switched away from coal and into things like natural gas, fracking, which is still not great, but we are putting fewer emissions out. 24 states said, well, you know what? The United States pulled out of the Paris Agreement. We're still in. We are states, and that's 55% of the American population. These states have agreed to stick with the Paris Agreement. They are going to reduce their climate emissions to Paris Agreement levels by 2050 or 2030, and they're right on track. All of these cities across the country have also committed to meeting those levels, and a number of them have already reached those levels. So the world is marching on without the federal government in a really exciting way. New investments in clean energy are going through the roof. So the business people know where their bread is buttered. They know where to put their money. And that's a really surprising point to me. I thought that corporations were the polluters. And they are. Like, the top 100 polluters of the planet, responsible for 71% of the pollution, are all corporations. But 250 of the biggest ones are all committed to moving to 100% renewable energy. They have different timelines, but it's just incredible to think of these massive corporations. Alphabet, that's the parent company of Google. They are the largest consumer of renewable power on the planet. They have been 100% renewable energy since 2017. Amazon will be completely carbon neutral in 20 years. They're building wind and solar farms. Apple has committed to 100% renewable energy, started in 2018. And by 2020, they will be entirely carbon neutral. That means they will put no new carbon into the air. If they do put any, they will have to find a way to subtract it somewhere else, like planting forests. And Microsoft, this is amazing. They've been carbon neutral since 2012. They will be 100% using renewable energy by 2025. That's in 5 years. By 2030, they intend to be carbon negative. That means they will take more carbon out of the air than they're putting in. And by 2050, Microsoft says that they will have removed all the carbon from the air that it has ever produced since they were founded in 1979. That's a pretty decent goal. We'll see if they can actually make it. So in the end, there are really two reasons to prepare for climate change. The first reason is that these climate disasters are going to be happening more and more often, and you'll be ready for them. I mean, there's the literal sense of preparation. You'll have some food in the pantry, you'll have some water in your house, you'll have a source of power, and you'll feel confident that you can get out of the house and get in touch with your family on short notice. But the second reason is a psychological reason. You'll feel better knowing you're prepared. I mean, there's a psychological element. I read a lot when I was working on this book about something called eco-despair. And that's a depression, a feeling of hopelessness that the world is going to hell and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, a psychiatrist will tell you that a big part of depression is the feeling that you don't have control. You can't do anything to change your situation. So by taking steps to prepare, you are taking action and you feel better about yourself and the situation. So I guess what that means is climate change is here. It's going to get worse. And decarbonization, this process of moving away from burning fossil fuels, is coming. All you have to do is look at the young people, marching and demonstrating and electing in the streets. But it is going to take a long time. It's going to take 80 years or so before we've completely stopped burning coal and oil and thickening that blanket around the planet in the atmosphere. So in the meantime, you have two options. You can reduce the amount of carbon and you can prepare. So there's a sneak peek for you from my upcoming book, How to Prepare for Climate Change. I'm happy to take any questions you have. I have your organizers on my speakerphone here. So they're in touch with you. And if you want to submit any questions, she will relay them to me and I can answer them live. It's the miracle of modern technology. By the way, in case you want to know where I am, I'm in an empty movie theater. I thought it would be only appropriate to sit in front of an empty audience. All right.
Okay, David, this is Margaret. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Oh, great. And we have a time delay, sort of echo here, so I'll try to ask the questions and not listen to us coming on.
Okay.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. That was really great. And you've given us a lot, not only to think about, but to have assignments, I guess, to make sure our homes are ready to go and can do what we need to do. So in terms of questions, we have a question, first of all, somebody saying how wonderful your presentation was. And of course, we know we're all looking forward to your book and want to read it and find out everything that you're saying, even more detail. But the question is, how do we reach people who will not be likely to read your book or any similar book? We have on the extreme end, of course, climate deniers and other people who are, just climate neutral, who maybe don't deny it, but don't really see any reason to change what they're doing. Do you have any suggestions on how we might reach people in those categories?
Yes, and that is a fantastic question. I've done a lot of work on this question. The first chapter of the book is called Acclimating to Climate Change, and it's just about the psychological aspects of getting used to this new world. And there's a big section on it, on your precise question: how do we speak to people who are deniers or who don't want to take action? So first of all, I've really come to terms with the fact that when we talk about a climate change denier, we're talking about two classes of people. There are people who say that there is no change in the weather, people who are not looking at the TV or looking out the window and seeing the floods, the hurricanes, and the wildfires. I think that group is very small these days. I think people who say, blah, 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 nothing's happening, I think that sort of denier is almost non-existent. I think the larger group are people who say, well, sure, the weather's changing, but it's always changed. These are natural cycles. We've always had them. That's the group that a third of Americans are still insisting. And by the way, when I say a third of Americans still believe that these are natural cycles, let me remind you that 25% of Americans believe that aliens walk among us. So use your judgment in grading that number. But what I have learned is that you cannot convince anybody with facts and figures. This has been shown in study after study. If you're a denier and I show you my graphs and show you my numbers, you will not be convinced. In fact, you will retrench. You will go the other way. You will say, no way, it's all natural. I'm not changing my ways. The way to talk to a denier, somebody who insists that this is all natural, is A, listen to their side, listen to what they have to say. There's a great saying that one of these therapists told me in the book, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So listen to their side and then respond not with numbers and statistics, but with stories and personal anecdotes. Talk about how you lost power during Sandy. Talk about how your daughter couldn't go to college because the campus was flooded. You know, tell stories, and they have far more effect. The other really big thing that you can do, there's a thing called the social norms effect or social contagion, and that's where people around you notice what you do. Now, imagine that you're in a restaurant and all of a sudden 10 other people in the restaurant jump up and run out of the room. Now you're sitting there eating. What'll you do? You're gonna look around. You might even get up and leave too. That's the social norms effect. You are affected by what the people around you are doing. So if you start taking steps for climate change, if people see you putting in a generator, if you talk at a get together about this go bag you're preparing, other people will start observing that and they will be swayed non-verbally that way. What a great question.
Okay, we have a related question about the relative influence of people who try to give the sort of information you've been providing. And as you say, people do turn out when it's sort of, they see it as too nerdy with graphs and all that sort of thing. But we have had some very visible people, for instance, celebrities, and then Greta Thunberg, the Swedish student who came out and really seemed to have a lot of support. Do you think we should be maybe depending more on people like that, and people then saying, you know, the same way people ignore, you know, somebody maybe from NASA, but will listen to Kim Kardashian or somebody?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think the advantage that the celebrities have is, again, the social norms effect. I mean, the more we keep hearing the message and seeing the message and seeing that people are concerned about it, the more our brains turn and we say, I wonder, the more we start listening to the message. So yeah, I think they've had a huge effect. And Greta Thunberg has had a gigantic effect, especially on young people. I mean, in schools all over the world, they had those giant walkouts in school. I mean, pretty soon the number of deniers is going to evaporate as the young people become the majority. Just a matter of time.
Okay, well, we have another question about just the general change in the respect, or I guess I should say the lack of respect for science. I mean, climate change is part of it, but it seems as if we've had a trend recently, and without getting into the political minefield of individuals and their contribution in that way, is this likely to change? I mean, we still have nurses, for instance, reporting that people who are being put on a ventilator, and as they're put on, you know, they say, oh no, this COVID is a hoax, even though they may not live to see the end of the week. Do you think there's any likelihood we're going to see a greater respect given to science and scientists, or should we be just going more, as you say, the anecdotes and personal stories and so on?
Yeah, another great question about the anti-science trend in this country. Super distressing to me. And yet, I have to say, when I really listen, I understand that technology, I mean, look where we are. We carry these around. We can't fix our cars by hand anymore. We have no idea how this works. We don't understand our machines anymore. We don't understand our medicine anymore. And one logical reaction as a human being is, if you don't understand something, to fear it. Fear of the unknown has always been a fundamental human reaction. So my part of that is to help people understand the science. That's why I do these TV shows on NOVA, on PBS. It's explaining science. Once something is familiar, it's no longer frightening. So yes, the political part is changing rapidly. President-elect Biden is getting his pick of the smartest scientists in the country, in the world, and they're good communicators too. So these things will go hand in hand. I don't anticipate the anti-science movement to go away instantly. I think it's more of a pendulum. And I think when the world is not quite so terrifying as it has been, I think people's trust will begin to rebuild.
Okay, well, I think we probably just have time for one more question, because I know you have to get on to your next interview. But just a question concerns the relative scientific preparation of the U.S. compared to other countries. I mean, for instance, every time we look at whether it's fifth graders or eighth graders or high school students, we don't see the U.S. coming up at the top in terms of any comparison with other countries. Also, if we look at the people who produce the technology, you know, not just the users, but I don't know, graduate programs in physics, computer science, these seem to be dominated even in our own country by people who are not U.S. citizens. Do you think the U.S. maybe should be concentrating a little bit more on getting us up to date in terms of our own education, or encouraging people to go into those fields, not just the users of technology, but the people who produce the kinds of things we need?
I think it's another great question. I think you're referring to those graphs that show where American students do in science and math relative to people from other countries. Yes, it's distressing as we go down in those numbers. But I would also encourage you to remember what graduate students, admissions officers have said, which is there is more to being a great entrepreneur, a great inventor, a great leader than how you do on standardized tests. That it turns out, yes, you can put Americans up against students from China or India, and we will do more poorly on the science and math tests. But we inevitably do better on the creative thinking, the imagination, the problem solving. So American culture tends to prize these less tangible, less measurable aspects, you know, inventing something or coming up with the next great idea. Some other cultures may prize academic scores more. So there's a little more to it than those graphs show. So yes, I'm all for getting better science and math scores, but that's not the end of the story.
Okay, well, we're about out of time, David, so I appreciate so much everything you told us, and not only the information you gave, but your encouragement. And as I said, all the assignments, I'm going to go right out. I do have a go bag. It's not up to date, but I'll try to get
Good
it.
for you.
Yeah, I can't. I did go out and buy a transistor radio with batteries, though, so I have that and a few other things. So we'll all want to update that. So thanks again, and goodbye to all the wise women. I'm sorry we can't be with you in person, but we're certainly happy we had this opportunity to share a wonderful experience with, I would have to say, one of our best speakers. So thanks again, David.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys. See you around town.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.